Dr. Sellon is an Associate Dean of Graduate School and a Professor of Equine Medicine in the Department of Veterinary Clinical Sciences at Washington State University. She received her BBM degree from LSU, and after completing a one-year internship at Texas A&M University, she was in private practice in central Kentucky, an equine practice, and then went to North Carolina State University, where she did a training in residency in equine medicine, and at North Carolina State University, she received her PhD in virology with a minor in biotechnology. She remained at North Carolina State University and was promoted to the rank of associate professor. Dr. Sellon is a diplomate in the American College of Veterinary Internal Medicine, where she served as past president in 2010. Her research interests are in the area of pathophysiology of equine infectious diseases and novel ways to treat chronic and acute pain in horses. And by looking at her CV, she has published extensively in that area and has also been well-funded. She's also the senior editor of two textbooks, Equine Internal Medicine and Equine Infectious Diseases. Dr. Sellon has received numerous awards and distinctions. Noteworthy, I feel, is in 2008, she was bestowed the Distinguished Alumnus Award at Louisiana State University, and also from her vitae, she has been cited for her leadership and vision in developing the small animal internal medicine and large animal internal medicine specialties in ACVI. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Deborah Sellon.
Thank you very much. Can you all hear me all right? I am very excited to be here, and thank you for the kind invitation. I will tell you that when I left town, Pullman, Washington, yesterday morning, it was about 30 degrees, and it was foggy, and there was a sheet of ice on the road, and the anti-lock brakes kept kicking in. So it's a real pleasure to be here with the sunshine and warm weather, although everyone I talk to tells me how cold it is today. Yeah. I have to tell you, this is great. How many of you are veterinarians? We got to maybe get you involved. How many of you are veterinarians? Okay. Veterinary students too. Have you got any veterinary students? We got a few. Okay, good. So I want to start by asking you a question. I want to know, let me see, raise your hand if you're a veterinarian or a veterinary student. Keep it up for a minute. Okay. So if you knew when you entered undergraduate school you wanted to be a veterinarian, keep your hand up. If you knew when you started high school you wanted to be a veterinarian, keep your hand up. If you knew when you were in middle school you wanted to be a veterinarian, keep your hand up. Very good. See, there's quite a lot of people, and sometimes back to their very earliest of memories, people know that. And in 1999, Dr. Marty Becker, who many of you may know as the author of Chicken Soup for the Pet Lover's Soul, he's a WSU grad. He spoke at the commencement ceremony for our veterinary students. And I remember he stood up there and he said that the average age at which individuals determine they want to become a dentist or a lawyer or a physician is somewhere around the middle of their undergraduate years. But for veterinarians, the average age is closer to around 12. And he didn't cite a source, but I believe it because it's been my experience on admissions committees and from my personal life. And he went on to explain that that is at the core of the difference in our profession and the other healthcare professions. So, and I think there's a tremendous amount of truth to that. We become veterinarians for reasons often that we maybe don't even understand, but for many of us it starts at an early age, and for me it did. And I came from a very elite equestrian background where I learned to ride on my grandfather's farm in East Tennessee. And as you can see, we had nothing but the finest mounts. And I'm displaying the fine touch, you see, at good rate. And I'm a little disappointed my heels aren't down. I was barefoot just so that you could see the heel position, but that is my background. My grandfather had a small cattle farm in East Tennessee in the foothills of the mountain. That's where I learned to ride. And like many people, having been on the admissions committee, I know that most veterinarians, when they come, or most students, when they come and they interview for veterinary school, they have a story. Something in their background that sparked an interest in wanting to be a veterinarian. And for me, I have a number of those stories, but I wanted to pick one in particular that really had a profound interest in me that I think has resonated at multiple levels throughout my career, and so we'll come back to it. And this happened when I was, I must have been about 14 or 15 years old at the time. And I was living in North Carolina, and I had a horse. This is my first horse. That's another long story. And he was living at another elite equestrian facility in North Carolina that doubled as a cattle farm, hangout for juvenile delinquents, and other sorts of things. But at the time, North Carolina was not a brucellosis-free state, and the cattle developed problems with brucellosis. And as a result, the horses developed a problem with brucellosis. And we had a whole, this is a picture, got a pause, that I got from Dr. Nicoletti. Is Dr. Nicoletti here? Oh, yay! Dr. Nicoletti, this is your brucellosis picture, because I didn't have one from when I was 14 or 15, and so I have to give a shout out to Dr. Nicoletti. But this is one of the profound formative incidents of my youth, was this outbreak because horses started to get fistulous withers. And there were probably a dozen altogether out of maybe 60 random source, bizarrely under cared for horses on this facility. And there was nothing that could be done medically for those horses at that time, and they were euthanized. And that was incredibly difficult because my horse was living on this facility. And I remember that the state veterinarians came in to test all the cattle. And in order to test the cattle, they had to run them into the barns and catch them and all of this stuff. And there's no proper handling facility. So they were going to run them into the barn where my horse's stall was. And they were going to put these cattle in my horse's stall while they tested them, and then my horse would go back in the stall afterwards. Well, I arrived before dawn that morning and put a padlock on my stall door because I didn't want those cows. It's my first real act of civil disobedience, but there's no way I wanted those brucellosis cows in my horse's stall. So I padlocked the stall door, and then I left, and I didn't come back for about 2 days. I knew my horse would be fine, and the man, Mr. Hodgins, he was very angry with me. But the good news is my horse never got brucellosis, but I saw my friends' horses die from it, and it was devastating, and they had to kill a number of cattle. And I already, at that point, was very interested in veterinary medicine, but one of the driving forces, obviously, was to find out more about brucellosis. Why did all of these animals have to die, Dr. Nicoletti? And we will come back to how that has, I think, the earliest stage at which I really became interested in infectious diseases. Now, most veterinarians, I talk to most veterinary students when I do admissions, have some kind of story. Sometimes it's a kitten, sometimes it's a dog, sometimes it's a fish. It can be all kinds of things, but we all have these kinds of stories that made us want to be veterinarians because we want to keep this from happening to other people's animals, right? About the same time, what comes out? Because this was literally almost the same time. This was published in 1972. How many of you have read it? How many of you watched it on TV? Oh, yeah. And for my generation of veterinarians in particular, it was incredibly formative. And if you already wanted to be a veterinarian, you wanted to be like James Herriot. And you wanted to save the cattle and the horses and the dogs and the sheep and even cats. Was Dr. Levy here? In trouble. Okay. So I decided to become a veterinarian, and I went to Louisiana. I did undergraduate, and I will tell you that I did a 2-year undergraduate program, and we're going to come back and talk about that. I did not complete a bachelor's degree, and I did not have a bachelor's degree, and that almost jeopardized my opportunity to get a PhD because I didn't have a bachelor's degree. I continued on and did veterinary school at LSU. I thank you for overlooking that and inviting me anyway. From there, I did a 1-year rotating internship at Texas A&M, which was an incredible opportunity to learn from some really great people. I'll have to say that I was a little concerned about moving to College Station, Texas, but it was one of the best years of my life. Great people, great experience, lots of caseload at that time and still. From there, I did the 2 years in clinical practice in Kentucky. And I want to pause there for a minute because there's some things here that you might learn about me and what motivates me that aren't obvious from my CV. When I was in those 2 years, I worked for a large standard-bred breeding farm. At the time, it was, I think, the largest in the country, and they had satellite farms in 4 or 5 other states, including one in Florida. All of our yearlings came down to Florida to grow up, and then they shipped back up to Kentucky for the sales in the fall. So I spent a huge amount of time vaccinating and deworming and taking care of foals and handling the breeding operation. And I found out several things about myself as a professional. One, I didn't really like reproductive work that much, I'm sorry. It was okay, but it didn't float my boat. I didn't like lameness work at all, which I had actually thought I really wanted to do, but I discovered, I sort of discovered that during my internship, but it reinforced it. But what I really did like was internal medicine, and I love fold diseases and complicated problems that had to be sorted through. I loved dealing with the folds, but most of our folds were healthy, which is a good thing. I loved preventing disease, but I also had experience with two really significant problems on the farm. One is we had constant strangles, in every age. We had a separate barn for the sick, lame, and lazy, and every time we had a horse with strangles, it went to the barn for the sick, lame, and lazy. And they lived there until they recovered. And most of them just had this typical submandibular abscess caused by strep, zoepidemicus, or strep equi subspecies equi, for those of you who are not equine veterinarians. And they would drain pus, and some of them, these abscesses would become so big, we had to do tracheostomies. And we tried everything to stop strangles. We vaccinated with every commercial vaccine. My boss, who was very progressive, Steve Conway, incredible veterinarian, was working with Cornell on an experimental vaccine. They came down, did this experimental intranasal vaccine, worst year we ever had. Got it into the brood mares, had brood mares that got guttural pouch empyema, and then they couldn't swallow, and all kinds of things, and we could never stop it. At this point, we didn't know as much about the epidemiology of strangles as we know now, and in retrospect, there's a way we could have fixed it. But we didn't know that at the time, and it was incredibly frustrating, and it cost a lot of money, and it caused a lot of disease, and it cost the lives of some of our animals. We also had a lot of peripheral secondary. The second thing that happened is that the second fall I was there, 2 weeks prior to the autumn sales, which is one of the biggest money-making events of the year, we sold 120 yearlings. There was an outbreak of influenza. 120 yearlings with temperatures of 105. Holy cow, you should have seen the farm manager, who was the businessman. Dana, you can imagine the level of stress as he sees 120 yearlings about to go to the biggest premier standardbred sale in the world, and they have temperatures of 105, and are any of them going to make it? And the financial loss, if they didn't make it, was going to be huge. And the thing was, these horses were fully vaccinated according to the recommendations that were in place and the vaccines that were available at that point in time. And how could this happen that we get 120 yearlings with temperatures of 105? Well, the good news is they had veterinarians who were willing to work overtime, and we treated them all, and all but one of them made it to the sale. But these things, together with this interest in internal medicine and my complete boredom with vaccination and deworming over and over and over and over again, I can't tell you how many stomach tubes I've passed in my life in those 2 years, sent me back to school. So now we'll fast forward through the CV again. I go to North Carolina State. I do a residency in internal medicine. I do a PhD, and I had two kinds of fields I was interested in, but mostly infectious diseases. And I know a lot of that was driven because of the brucellosis in my life and because of the strangles and the influenza. So I did a PhD in the end with Dr. Fred Fuller, who's not a veterinarian. He is a virologist who did a lot of lentivirus work. And this was about the time that lentivirus work was really taking off because of the AIDS epidemic. And there was a lot of money funding coming in from NIH. And I was fortunate enough to be able to get an KOA. They were called Physician Scientist Awards at that point to fund my research. And I worked with him. I worked collaboratively also, and did work with some researchers at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill who were on my committee. Learned a lot about viruses. And the funny thing is, when I was a vet student, I hated virology. I mean, I absolutely hated it. I didn't want to have anything to do with it. I thought it was one of the most boring subjects we had, and you just had to learn it so that you could move on to the cool stuff that helped horses. But I found that after having lived through these diseases and seeing what influenza could do, and seeing what equine infectious anemia could do, and seeing what strangles could do, suddenly the whole field of infectious diseases became alive. And viruses were the most amazing thing. And figuring out how these little bits of protein and DNA and RNA can cause such devastating consequences was fascinating to me. So I did the PhD, and I did a sort of unofficial postdoc working with Venezuelan equine encephalitis with Bob Johnston at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill afterwards. That was still off of this Physician Scientist Award. And that introduced me to the world of mice as a model for animal diseases, and also to biosafety level 3 research, which was really fascinating. Stayed on in the faculty there, and my goal was to have an NIH lab and do clinics. And I tried really, really hard to do it. And I had a relatively low clinical commitment compared to a lot of clinicians, but I love the clinics, and I was doing research and I was getting money. I wasn't getting an RL1 though, and I was getting exhausted. And I eventually came to the conclusion that something had to give, that I couldn't work on clinics the way I was and still do NIH level, benchtop molecular research. And I said, there are very few people in the world, I think, that can. There are very few that are successful at it long term. And what happened to me is what I've seen happen to a lot of people in my position who have the PhD in the clinics, is I make a choice. And I decide, do I want to be primarily a clinician, or do I want to be primarily a researcher? And in the end, my desire to be a veterinarian in the clinic won out. And I said, it's not that I don't want to do research, because I love research, but I'm not going to go back to NIH anymore. I'm going to go into the clinic, and I'm going to use my experiences in the clinic and the diseases that I see to inform the research choices I make. And I'm going to take the PhD that I earned to make sure that the research I do in the clinic and on clinical problems is the best quality research it can be. And thankfully for me, that turned out to be a really good plan. And about that time, I relocated to Washington State University. And I was able at that point, when I got to Washington, I established some effective collaborations. I kept doing infectious disease research on protozoal myeloencephalitis, working with Don Knowles and some of the people in Vet Micropath and the USDA unit at WSU. But eventually I started getting a bit, my interest was drawn towards clinical problems like pain management, and I've morphed more and more. And I'm still, I told somebody this morning, still writing grant proposals about pain management, still supervising research projects, still hopefully writing a paper. If that resident will get, she just had it to me on Wednesday, I got a reminder. Okay, so along the way I became board certified in internal medicine, right? And when I took the exam, I thought there were some questions on there that were really not right. I was taking the test and he said, this is a silly question and it shouldn't be written that way. So I went up at the reception afterwards and I told the chair of the exam committee, this was a terrible question and that was a terrible question and what are you people thinking? And what did he do? Put me on the committee. Exactly what you should do to people who complain. And that was my introduction to the world of organized veterinary medicine. And I became very involved in ACVIM, starting with work with the exam, which I found very exciting, and it actually transformed the way I thought about the exam, and I realized it actually is a really good exam that could be tweaked and made a little better, but overall it's actually a pretty good thing. And I learned a lot about educational testing, high stakes testing, and then I got drawn into more and more components of ACVIM, including the idea that perhaps large animal medicine should be a separate specialty. Because at the time, there was internal medicine, neurology, cardiology, and oncology. And internal medicine was both large and small animal. Lots of small animal people, fewer than 300 at the time, large animal people. And we were kind of getting lost in the shuffle. And so I was fortunate to become involved with a team that worked to create bylaws and guidelines to separate large animal medicine. We did a lot of negotiation, and we were able to separate it and become a separate specialty under the umbrella of ACVIM. Since then, they've really flourished. There's more than 500 members. We did a number of other things about changing exams and structures and policies and rules. And at the conclusion of my service in the last position I held with ACVIM, I was coming to the point where I said, but I've gotten away from horses. I really want to do some more horse stuff. And so I started getting involved with AAP. And I started again working with them on the board of directors and through some committees. And again, there were these big problems that needed to be solved. And I found a great deal of positive emotion came back to me by being able to navigate through complex problems that involved a lot of people. Meanwhile, back home at WSU, I was really enjoying being a clinician, but I was wanting to practice those skills of problem solving, of working with people, of doing the bigger thing in an administrative level, and I started taking on some graduate school responsibilities at WSU. And this is a central graduate school. Luckily, it was located in a building directly across the street from the veterinary school, so I got to park in the same parking lot, and I could just run back and forth. And most years, I've had a split commitment where I'm part one side and part the other. This year, I'm 75% graduate school and 25% vet med. My 25% right now is working with the residents, managing the teaching herd, and a lot of lectures because we're short a couple of faculty. So now I'm really becoming intrigued, and I'm really learning a lot about higher education, and I decide to apply for the position here. And there's only one other position that I've applied to since I've been at WSU, and that was about 7 or 8 years ago. And I originally told people no when they said, would you be interested in applying? Because I said, no, I like it in Pullman, things are going well, I don't really want to. But then I started looking more. And I started looking at what was here at Florida, and I got intrigued. And I saw emerging pathogens, and I saw this fantastic clinic with all these great people. And I said, you know, I might be interested. And so at the last minute, I'm pretty sure it was the last minute, I submitted my application. And I told only very few people, one of who is a clinical veterinarian who I have tremendous respect for, incredibly good at what he does, very talented teacher. Told him, he said, why would you want to be a dean? Why would anybody want to be a dean? I said, because I need to be a veterinarian. I am a veterinarian. When I fill out my taxes, I don't write educator, I don't write administrator, I write veterinarian. I mean, no matter what I do, I am a veterinarian. That's what I am. He said, well, deans aren't veterinarians. You won't be a veterinarian if you're a dean. I have to tell you, this veterinarian, this is my husband. He's in trouble. He's in big trouble. I said, what do you mean I won't be a veterinarian? He said, you'll never touch an animal. I said, who says you have to touch an animal to be a veterinarian? And I said, look, as a veterinarian working in the clinic, I loved it, and I was able to make a huge difference in lives one at a time, for the most part, one horse at a time. I said, as a dean, you can make a difference in the lives of animals, tens, hundreds, thousands at a time. And you can help build the environment that graduates veterinarians who go out and treat tens, hundreds, thousands. He had to give in because he doesn't keep arguing when I start going like that. So he finally allowed at the end that yes, you could be a dean and be a veterinarian. And luckily, that opinion coincides with this document. How many of you have read or seen this document? It's from the National Councils for Research, from the National Research Council, published by the National Academies Press. Is available online, free as a PDF download at this address. And it is a high-level assessment of the workforce needs in veterinary medicine. And it probably should be required reading for all of us who are academic veterinarians, because the information that's in here is incredibly well-researched, evidence-based, put together after a great deal of thought and consultation with lots of different people. And their conclusion is that veterinary medicine is at a crossroads. And there's some parts of veterinary medicine where the workforce needs are declining and likely to continue to decline, but there's others where there's tremendous need. And they define veterinarians in the very broadest sense. Anyone who has the broad base of veterinary medical education and uses it to advance the well-being of animals, but also recognizing it's the well-being of animals at the crossroads with human health and with ecology and with the environment, and the need to incorporate all of that into what we train, because that's where some of the greatest future needs are likely to be. Dealing with animals, not just the traditional cats and dogs, and these are all from your UF website, incidentally, I stole those pictures. And 75% of veterinary students today want to go into small animal practice. And you know what, I firmly believe that they want to go into small animal practice because they had incidents like my brucellosis incident, where they saw things that touched them emotionally, often at a young age, and filled in them a desire to do things for animals and to help the animals. I mean, how often do you hear that if you're on the admissions committee, right? But what it took for me personally was a maturation of those thought processes beyond the individual animal to start to realize that a veterinary medical education could allow me to do amazing things for animals even if I never touched an animal. And sometimes doing them at that bigger scale was even more fulfilling than going out and touching and helping the individual animal. And that's the conclusion that was reached through this workforce. It's the conclusion that's reached from every group that's looked at this topic. And where we have a great deal of growth as veterinary educators is in the field of trying to educate our students about how they can be of use to the animal population in ways outside of small animal medicine. And this comes back to this concept of One Health, which I'm sure you've all heard, and so I don't have to explain. So the next step is, what's a veterinary college? If we say a veterinarian is anybody who does something, takes their veterinary education and works for the well-being of animals at the intersection of human medicine and ecology and the environment and sustainability and all of these things, what then is a veterinary college? This is what I get from your website. This is your mission statement from the University of Florida. And all of these things. And if you look closely and we dissect it out, the mission is to educate, right? Part of it. Educate veterinary students. We need to provide them with the clinical experience because I'm not saying we need to stop making small animal practitioners. We need a lot of small animal practitioners and there's growing need for it. So we need to provide them with a good clinical education. We need to prepare new educators though, because one of the biggest workforce needs that was identified in the work that was seen is the need for new educators. We don't know where our replacements are coming from, and that's a complex problem. In addition, we're here at a university because part of what we need to do is develop and advance new knowledge. And that's part of your mission. And it's part of the mission of most veterinary schools. And in particular, biomedical and agricultural knowledge. And we're going to come back to that. And finally, it's not enough to produce the knowledge. We have to disseminate it out and make it in a form that's useful to all of the people who depend upon us for the knowledge. And in particular, and this is quite unique, I think, for UF, it's certainly not listed in the mission statement for WSU, is developing zoological and aquatic animal medicine. And this is an area that really does speak to that One Health concept at the nexus of animals and people and the ecology. So how do we accomplish this? It has to have, the only way to accomplish this goal of providing optimal health at the nexus of all of these things is you've got to have a veterinarian. And so you've got to have a veterinary college. And we as a profession, I don't think, have done a terribly good job of promoting ourselves as the ones who should be at the center of everything. Because we are the center of everything, right? Of course we are. Takes a veterinary college, and it needs to be at a land-grant institution. And I'll tell you why it needs to be a land-grant institution. As a faculty member, I knew I was employed at land-grant institutions through my career, but I never really understood what they were all about and the history behind them until I started in administration, and then I spent a little time investigating. And so for those of you who may be like me and not quite know the whole history behind land grants, in 1862, let's think about that year for a minute. What's going on in the United States in 1862? That's always amazed me. We're in the middle of the Civil War, and this amazing piece of legislation was passed. I mean, who would have thought that anybody's attention would turn to land-grant universities? But in 1862, the Morrill Act was passed. And it gave to individual states a large parcel of federally owned land. In return, the states were either to sell that land or use it in some way to generate the funds to produce a college. And it's supposed to be specifically devoted to agricultural and mechanical arts. So it was meant to be an agricultural type college. And it was meant to have broad access for all students from all types of classes, economic classes. And prior to this time, most higher education at universities was for the elite upper class, and it was largely based on the classical education of languages and mythology and all of these Latin and all of this stuff. This was meant to be a practical thing. We're in the midst of the growing industrial revolution, and we need to develop a workforce from the vast majority of average Americans, and that's what the purpose behind land-grant institutions was. In 1887, I want to say 1887 or 1888, there was the Hatch Act was passed. And the Hatch Act gave funds to these universities to have agricultural experiment stations. And that's why most land-grant institutions have agricultural experiment stations. In 1890, the second Morrill Act was passed. And in this period, they said that this act provided funds to the land-grant institutions for ongoing operations if they agreed to a race-neutral application or access. But they had an out. They said, in order to do the race-neutral thing, you can, as long as you have a just separate process, you can have a separate process. So the end result is there were a number of these white-starred institutions that were established as separate land-grant institutions. So, for example, Alcorn State and Tuskegee, Alcorn State University in Mississippi, North Carolina A&T, which I work with, and those were all included as then land-grant institutions, so they're also on the list. In 1994, there was a new act, and I've forgotten the name of it now, but it incorporated 28, I believe, tribal colleges, many of them two-year colleges. So again, now you'll see, for us, this Northwest Indian College is one that we work with, is Salish Kootenai College. These are two four-year colleges. They're the exception. Most of these blue dot tribal colleges are two-year colleges that were instituted. So land-grant colleges are the place in the state that is the center for research and education related to agriculture, often the primary engineering school for the state, ecology. So they do all that aspects of the One Health system that you need about ecology and environment and agricultural and food programs and animal science and all of that. So you got to have a veterinary college, but you also need all of this to address the One Health problem. You need a land-grant institution. But that's not enough because you're still missing one important component. Human health, right? So you need to have a medical school at the land-grant institution in order to do it and do it well. Surprisingly, okay, so there's 29 veterinary schools in the United States. And some of you may not know that because there's a brand new one this year. Utah State University is the 29th. 29 29 veterinary schools, all of three or four are at land-grant institutions, so most of them are. There's a few that aren't. But fewer than 10 of them have a medical school on the same campus. And the opportunities then, you now are one of the elite few. For a population of 300 million in the United States, you are one of fewer than 10 that have a veterinary college at a land-grant institution with a medical school. The opportunities are profound. And not only do you have the medical school, but you have also all the other colleges of the Health Science Center, or the Academic Health Center. And I think that is the component that compelled me to really want to apply to be your dean here at UF, is because I see an incredible opportunity for growth and to be at the forefront of not only veterinary medicine, but at the health of the world at large through this One Health concept, because you've got all the raw materials to do it. So how do you do it? Well, I think the veterinary college, of course, should be at the center of it all because veterinarians are at the center of it all. But in order to do it, we've got to change the way we, and by we I mean all of academic veterinary medicine. I don't yet know enough about what happens at University of Florida to tell you specifics. But we have to change what we do. For one thing, we as veterinarians can't do it alone. We need those engineers and agriculturalists and animal scientists and the people that understand the environment. And we need the physicians who understand human health, and we have to work together collaboratively. And a lot of times universities, most major universities, have not allowed for effective collaboration. This is right outside of Pullman, Washington. This is where I live. It's wheat fields everywhere. It's beautiful. But I put it here because of this silo. This silo is the metaphor for how we have tended to do research in all higher education at universities. We've evolved research as an individual investigator discipline, where you are rewarded as a faculty member because you have individually been a PI on a grant, you've individually been first author on a number of papers. That's how you get your promotion and tenure. And that structure and reward system has made it difficult for us to reach out and collaborate to solve problems that don't exist in a siloed environment. Okay, so let's look at what we need to do. We said that UF's mission is related to education, research, extension, and outreach. So we're going to take those three things, and I'm going to show you, and my knowledge is gained primarily from talking with a few colleagues that I know who are on the faculty here, but mostly from your website. And I'm going to look at things that I saw in perusing there, what you think you've done and done well. Things that I see as challenges, and the challenges are not necessarily unique to UF for the most part. They are challenges that I think face all veterinary colleges. And what are the opportunities for how to move forward to be at the forefront and be the leader in veterinary medicine? So let's start with education, because I'm passionate about veterinary education. When I became an administrator, classroom education is the one thing I said I will not give up. I'm going to keep teaching in the classroom. You've done some really great things. You've got your students in the clinic early. Well, we can't seem to do that very well at WSU, and I think that is a positive thing. I love the certificate programs. I'd like to talk about them some more. I think you've made good use of them. I wish Dr. Levy were here because I think the shelter medicine program is phenomenal, and she's done a great job with it. There's a lot of the mobile cardiology, the pet emergency clinic, and the rehab and fitness center. Lots of things that you're doing innovative in clinical education. And I think that you're on the brink of curriculum review, which gives you another chance to have a success. So what are the challenges? The challenges actually are huge. Because if we look at what is a veterinarian and we define it as someone who does all of these things, even be dean, and you can still be a veterinarian, how do we prepare someone for a career with that diverse of an opportunity ahead of them? That is the strength of a veterinary education. I honestly believe that a veterinary education is one of the most versatile, useful educations you can get. Your opportunity to change career paths, if you just lose interest in one thing and you want to do something else, it's amazing. But how do we do that in a way that we are sure we're producing what we want to produce? What's the outcome that we're looking for? Are we using optimal teaching methods? And all the literature about adult education shows that in order to teach effectively, you have to engage people in an activity. Standing in front and talking to you like I'm doing right now, not an effective teaching strategy. How do we change that? And because it's the norm at almost all veterinary schools, not quite all. We need to deliver primary care education better than we do, and this is we as a profession. We have evolved our teaching hospitals to where they're secondary, tertiary care centers, which is great and it's important and it shouldn't go away. But we also have to be sure that we're graduating students with entry-level competencies that are real, and that's a challenge. And we need to provide research opportunities and introduce our veterinary students to varieties of career options so that they can mature in the profession more quickly than I did. I'd like them to come in passionate about helping the animals, but very quickly see that it can be done on all different scales and in all different ways. The teaching hospital is a challenge, and everybody tells me Dr. Zimmel's doing an amazing job there, and so we congratulate her on that, and I understand that you're actually got a reasonable financial plan, because let me tell you, WSU right now does not. And it is a problem, and it is a problem that faces a lot of veterinary hospitals. Delivering primary care education at the same time training the next level of advanced specialists is a balancing act, and it's a challenge, and we have to address that. Okay, the elephant in the room. The single biggest problem facing veterinary education in my mind right now is the rising cost of education. It's an unsustainable debt load for students. I took this chart. You can get this data from lots of places, but this is a nice, pretty, colorful chart, so I got it from them. And let me show you carefully. This is R. That means resident tuition, the mean dollar value of resident tuition between 2001 and 2010, when the numbers stop. This red line here is non-resident mean. This is the non-resident maximum, and this is the non-resident minimum. So the sort of reddish-yellow colors are non-resident, the bluish colors are resident. And what you see is that the cost of education has risen. Let me tell you that the annual cost for tuition at University of Florida, I'm such size so I'm going to be fair, is $28,000. That means your annual cost of tuition for your students is now pretty close to what the non-resident mean is, way above the resident mean for veterinary schools across the country, so sorry, I'm sure that that's not news to your students. This rise in tuition, there's lots of reasons for it. We've increased tuition tremendously at WSU, and it's a reaction to funding, but it's unsustainable because the debt load that this is resulting in for our students is increasing astronomically. This, again, only goes up to 2010, but currently for 2011, the data that the last survey was done, the average debt load for all students who had any debt, so excluding the ones who had no debt, the average debt load was $150,000. The average starting salary for the students who did not go on to higher education was $65,000. When you start getting debt loads that are that much more than the annual starting salary, it's unsustainable. The amount of debt load, it becomes almost impossible for students to even service the debt, much less pay down the principal. And it's a complicated problem, and I don't have an obvious solution for you, but it's going to be a multifactorial solution, but everybody's got to engage in the conversation, and we have to find ways to decrease the cost of educating students. And we can have that dialogue, but in 45 minutes we can't even begin to do it. So I just want to lay it out there. It has to be addressed. It has to be addressed as a profession. It's huge theme running through this report, which I've already shown you, and this one. If you're about to embark on curricular reform, I would encourage you to have people read. How many of you have read this report as well? A few of you. It has some innovative ideas. This was, again, a collaborative effort from the American College of, what is it called? The American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges is a mover and a shaker behind this initiative. And they've got some ideas and some suggestions that, you know what, faculty are going to say, no, we can't do that because we've never done it. And we have to do something. We cannot continue on the path we're on. And both of these documents emphasize the need to broaden our definition of what a veterinarian is and to think broadly. Okay, research. We're going to run out of my 45 minutes, so I want to cover it. You guys have some amazing research centers here. And especially when you work in collaboration with the existing other colleges. Phenomenal opportunities, phenomenal successes. I'm particularly intrigued and excited about emerging pathogens because infectious diseases have been my thing, so I really like it. But all these other things are great too. Genetics, man, individualized medicine and the possibilities there in veterinary medicine and human medicine are huge. Your aquatic animal health, unique. What a great opportunity for growth as well. But let's face it, support is declining from everywhere. People are not interested in academic medicine and pursuing jobs as clinical scientists or even as faculty members in the basic sciences because they don't see the financial rewards there. They can have more financial rewards elsewhere with their DVM. But the other big problem, I would argue, is again the silo concept of research rewarding the individual. This is data from FASEB's website, from a PowerPoint, and I put the address here. It actually comes from a PowerPoint presentation that they have on their website posted. It's got a huge array of graphs and charts about NIH funding. NIH funding on the surface looks to have increased quite a lot since 1995. But the truth is that the number of individual R1 equivalent awards has declined and the success rate has declined markedly. It's much harder to get competitive NIH funding. The good news is that the UF Health Sciences as a whole has done quite well in this environment. The bad news is that if you rank all veterinary colleges in the United States on the basis of NIH dollars coming to investigators at the veterinary college, University of Florida ranks 23rd out of the 28 ranked. That's an opportunity, right? I mean, on the surface you say, oh, that's a huge opportunity. You've got all of these researchers who are doing great things in health sciences, and there's a tremendous opportunity for this veterinary college to be at the nexus of One Health research. Tremendous opportunities for growth. And I want to give some time to talk about clinical research, because clinical research often gets ignored in the overall scheme, because we start talking about research dollars and NIH, and the clinical faculty say, what about me? Sarah Roos, are you here? I've never met you. Hey! And so we're going to give a shout out to Dr. Roos, who discovered Leishmania in a U.S. horse. Not been seen before in the United States. Infectious disease, my ears go ears up, not ears down, because this could be potentially a problem, right? And you've got an Emerging Pathogens Institute to investigate. You can do great things. Things coming out of the clinic inform the research of tomorrow in the emerging pathogens, in the Genetics Institute. You've got to find ways, we as a profession have to find ways to forge links between our clinical faculty, who are doing great stem cell therapy for Dobermans with dilated cardiomyopathy. Where'd she go? There. And all of these other things that can inform, and if we find linkages between clinical faculty and the basic science faculty, then great things happen. And I will tell you, though, these may seem small dollars when you look at sometimes the dollar amount of a grant that comes in. The impact that they can, the immediate impact that they can have can be tremendous on the lives of animals and people who are with animals. So you cannot solely base the value of research on the number of dollars that come in. We need to grow the dollars, because dollars are important because they feed all the other programs and raise visibility and that sort of thing, but it's not the only thing. The opportunities research-wise are huge, and didn't have enough room for them all. Collaborative, I think, are huge. This is where veterinary medicine as a whole, as a profession, has the biggest room for movement forward, is collaborating with other professionals, with the people in the ag college, with the environmental engineers, with the medical, with the nurses, with the dentists, with all of them. But there's also opportunities for innovative external partnerships, working with industry, and it has to be done carefully, but it can be done very well to advance the research goals of the profession and for One Health. And it's all about the One Health. That's where the opportunities are. Extension and outreach. So I'm rushing here to try to finish up in my allotted time. Extension and outreach, you guys are doing some really great things. And Dr. House is doing this great work with the equine group, because you've got one of the biggest horse populations in the country as a state, you do. The shelter medicine program is phenomenal, the aquatic animal health, disaster response. What a great opportunity that's been to try to help animals and their owners. There are challenges, though. It's difficult, because when you go to clinical faculty and you ask them, can you help me with this outreach event, often their immediate response is, I'm just too busy, I can't do one more thing, please don't ask me. It's hard, I know. Or you get those faculty who say, oh, I'm so tired, oh, but that's so cool, I need to do that, and then before you know it, you've got some people who are doing it all. and some who are not doing much. And how do you balance that, and how do you reward it? Because if it's valued, it needs to be rewarded. Use of technology. That technology for the extension and outreach is growing by leaps and bounds, and you'd sure like to be at the forefront of that rather than at the backside watching. There's lots of opportunities out there. Building relationships and partnerships with the people in the state, because the state's often the group that you're working with most closely to try to enhance outreach. And you'll notice that on all of these, when I talk about the opportunities, I put celebrate successes. We can't, as a profession, sit back and not acknowledge the good we've done. And that's part of what I think a dean's job is, to go out and tell the world how great you guys have done as faculty. Because it's the faculty who do the great work. It's the faculty who develop innovative curricula. It's the faculty who find new ways to teach students. It's the faculty who get these research grants. But somebody needs to shout out how good you are to the rest of the world, because when the rest of the world starts to learn how good you are, suddenly new opportunities materialize. New partnerships become possible. New donors show up at your door. And all of those things are huge, and they're an important role of what the dean does for a university, for a veterinary college, for any college. And again, around the concept of One Health. So we'll conclude with what is a veterinarian. And I guess my take-home message is we're all veterinarians. If you're doing anything at that interface of animal health with the rest of the world, whether it be, you know, taking care of Fluffy and vaccinating Fluffy for Mrs. Jones, or we're doing research and finding out why Leishmania has shown up in the United States at this point in time, or we're working with environmental ecologists to understand how to better enhance wildlife survival with encroaching human populations, or if we're working to ensure a safe food supply for the country. All of those things are a veterinarian, and no one of us can do it alone. We have to do it together, and we have to reach out outside the profession in order to do that and meet the challenges that we're seeing. And I think Florida is very uniquely positioned to be the best veterinary college in the country, because you've got all the raw materials, you've got fantastic faculty, you've got initiatives in place, and you've got a lot of opportunities in front of you. Only 2.5 minutes late. Okay. Don't be shy.
Oh, I have never heard y'all this call. Of course.
You've identified one of the major problems facing veterinary students coming in is as far as the debt that they will acquire before they receive their veterinary degree. What do you see as the methods to get around that? Because lowering tuition at the University of Florida would probably be a reversal of a long-standing trend.
Correct, and it's not unique to Florida, I can tell you that. Our tuition's going up by leaps and bounds as well, but there's starting to be growing pushback that we may have maxed out. And you know, given where Florida is, I would hope they are close to maxing out on tuition. I'm sure those veterinary students in the audience hope so as well. So it's a multifactorial problem, the reason that we've gotten there, and it's going to require a multifactorial response. And it's not something that I think any one individual is going to find a solution to. I think there are some really excellent suggestions that come through the two reports. So let me give you examples of some of those. There's growing discussion about, do we really need to push students to have a 4-year undergraduate degree before they start veterinary medicine? You know, there are some really good educational programs in veterinary medicine in other parts of the world that don't require that. And it adds to debt. Is it enhancing our education? And if so, I think we need to have that dialogue. Do we need it? I did, and I said I'd come back to that, and I didn't. I only did 2 years of pre-veterinary study. And then I went on to veterinary school, and you know what? I think I've done okay. So I think it can happen. I've also seen students that were not mature enough to start at that point in time. So it's got to be done carefully, and we need to think about it. Is there a way to streamline the pre-veterinary curriculum more? That's one aspect of it. We need debt counseling, and I haven't even talked to anybody about what you do here. Most veterinary schools are now doing something with students. Do you have a program where you help the students and assist them with debt counseling from day one? That is a part of it. But we have got to, as faculty, find a way to be more cost-effective in delivering our education. Part of the problem and part of the reason that our costs have risen, and let me tell you that the estimates are that the cost per year to deliver a veterinary education averages $66,000 a year. So our tuition isn't even beginning to cover our actual costs. So we're not even close to, even the non-resident tuition doesn't come close to that. Why is it so expensive? Well, it's expensive because we're dealing with all these different species and all these different career options, and a lot of veterinary schools are trying to support every single discipline to the best of its ability. And then you've got 2 or 3 specialists in every discipline. It adds up, and the cost of faculty are tremendous. This suggestion makes me cringe, but I think it's going to have to be looked hard at, and is that I don't think all veterinary schools can be all things to all people. And there's models, and it's discussed in both of these papers about centers for excellence. And food animal is the example that's given most frequently. If you have people who want to be food animal practitioners, they've got to learn not just individual medicine, but they've got to learn really well about data management, production medicine, and can every veterinary school teach that? There are several models now, 4 or 5 that I'm aware of in the United States, that involve centers of excellence, collaborations of veterinary schools and other entities, where you can send the students away for 6, 8, 10 weeks to get that in-depth training that gets them to the level they need. You know, we were talking in the meeting I just came out of, aquatic animal health may be one that UF is really poised, or would be in a good position. Could you be a center of excellence with someone else? You know, what are the areas? This takes a dialogue, not just internally. You've got to dialogue with the other veterinary schools. And you've got to talk about how can we deliver education more effectively. The other thing is we've got to look at how we deliver the pre-veterinary education. And now, are there more cost-effective ways to do that? And I don't know the answer to that. It's intriguing. We've just embarked on this partnership with Utah State University, where they're going to do the first couple of years in Utah State. And they're actually delivering that curriculum very cost-effectively at Utah State, and then we do the clinical education at WSU. Maybe we need more of that, you know? I'm not saying that, because I know people can walk out, she said we should quit teaching first and second year. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we need to put everything on the table. If you were going to reinvent it, what would you do? If you wiped the slate clean and you said, I'm walking in and this is what I want to accomplish, how would I do it? And you know what? I am convinced that veterinarians are some of the smartest people in the world. And they're the best problem solvers, and the critical thinking skills and their ability to extrapolate. And you get a group of faculty, not just clinical faculty, but all faculty who really commit to the idea, let's forget everything, how would we do it? What would be the best way to do it? I think you guys have the answers, not me. Yes?
You talked about NIH funding, and you told us our ranking too. Knowing that a majority of the funding that you have described for University of Florida was made by PhDs. Now, how do you change that? How do we get DVMs to get NIH funding?
Okay. There's a couple of answers to that. I don't want to give the impression that NIH is the be-all and the end-all. It's just the one that you can get the data on, and it often has the biggest dollars. So, from my mind, number one, there's DVMs with PhDs, so that's one way. Now, I think clinical faculty are incredibly talented. We had this discussion in the group I was just in. And if you can forge linkages between clinical faculty and the DVM and the basic science researchers or the medical school researchers, then there are some collaborative opportunities that are huge. And I have known a lot of DVMs who are in academic positions that that's how they got into it. That's how they were able to enter that. I think that one of the best ways to do that is build an infrastructure of graduate education where you've got students who are co-mentored by DVM faculty and PhD faculty, and that's how it's worked at those schools that are at the top tier. And a lot of them are clinical residents. They're coming out of pathology residencies and medicine residencies, and they're going into PhDs, and they're not being mentored by the clinical faculty. They're being mentored in the PhDs by the basic science faculty, but the clinical faculty are involved.
How do you raise the current standing? Training these students right now will take another 4 more years to get them to be proficient at getting extramural funding. How do you raise it when you come in and you know that we're this low? How would you go out? Are you going to be going around recruiting PhDs who already have NIH funding? Or what's your proposal?
I don't have a proposal to share with you with detail at this point in time because I don't know enough about the University of Florida and the factors that have contributed to where you are at this point in time. And I don't think it is something that anybody changes instantaneously. It is something where you embark upon a path and you set a goal. NIH, that level of NIH funding doesn't change overnight. One of the encouraging things that I learned this morning in talking to Dr. Harvey and Dr. Peck was that there's actually quite a lot of NIH money that's flowing into the college in indirect costs because of faculty here who are co-investigators, but the NIH data is only going by principal investigators. So the NIH data is just one metric, and I don't want to get too focused on that, and I knew when I put it up there that it has the potential to generate a lot of angst. And I think you need to look at lots of metrics to see how that's happening, but it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen tomorrow.
What would be some of the solutions that you would like to place as soon as you come in? We have really a very good research dean.
Right. You have an excellent research dean. I'm very impressed with his thoughts, and I think he's already moving forward with some things. I think you need to strengthen or facilitate connections that would be fruitful. And that's where I think a lot of veterinary schools, that's where I think actually WSU struggles, is facilitating. We get these siloed, the clinical people are kept separate from the other people, and facilitating connections. NIH is funding more multi-investigator grants than ever before. They don't fund individual investigators. We've got to build teams. There are ways to do that, to facilitate, and I think there's structural things that can be changed. And again, I hesitate to give examples because as sure as you give examples, people say, oh, she wants to do that. But they're not, what works at one place doesn't work everywhere. And so you've got to come in and figure out the details before I can give you back a detail. But I know there are ways to do it. There's ways to do it facilitating graduate education. There are training grant proposals. There are facilitating collaborations with existing people. There's matching clinical faculty up with basic science faculty, with medical school faculty who have active programs. Dr. Estrada seems to be making great strides in those. But for some people, it's hard to do those things, and it's hard to make those connections, and you get so busy. So facilitating it, and there's ways to facilitate it through structural changes, through reward systems, through seed grant money, through central campus lobbying and politics, and changes in allocations of funding to support those innovative activities. But it depends on the individual group. So I can't tell you a specific, you're going to do A, B, C, and D, and this will work. Because I've been enough places to know that what works at place A doesn't always work at place B, but there is always something that will work at place B. It just may be different. Yes, sir.
So it costs $150,000 to educate a veterinary student, and are we maybe not looking at the problem the wrong way around? That in fact, what is bad is the starting salaries.
Oh, absolutely.
So a $60,000 starting salary for a DVM compared to a PharmD, a pharmacist whose maybe starting salary is $90,000. Maybe there's a problem there. And would you, what course of action would you embark on as dean to really look at that?
Okay.
Not that I think it's easy.
It's not easy, and I don't think it's something that University of Florida solves on its own. It's another one of those things that you have to reach out and work with the rest of the veterinary profession. And it's something that we see the starts of with these types of reports where they've pulled together these workforce reports, these committees. The NEAAVMC is continuing to work on this, and I agree, we need to raise the starting salaries. But one way to do that, well, it's complicated, but you have to increase the recognition of the value of veterinarians to all kinds and types of positions. And that means in government, in public health, there needs to be more veterinarians, and as the demand for those grows, as the recognition of their worth grows, the salaries grow and the pipeline for those jobs grow. And that's one of the big messages from the workforce report here. But you've got to be, we have to be working as a profession to do it, and the dean's job should be to be sure that UF is out there and in the middle of those discussions and pushing it forward at every opportunity with the rest of, with the AVMA, with the AAVMC, with all of these other groups, because we're going to do it as a group, not as an individual college.
Any more questions for Dr. Sellon? Well, with that, thank you
Okay,
very much.
thank you.